Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another video. Today this is a response to SGS Arts and his A to Z album challenge. I thought it would be a bit of fun to do my own version of that, even though once I started it I realised it was probably harder than doing the film A to Z, because there's probably about 5 alternatives for each letter. So it was actually pretty difficult. I'm probably going to start off with the same choice as SGS did for the number, but after that I don't think there's any commonality. I would say my list is probably a bit more mainstream, or certainly a little bit more well-known bands, but we'll just go through. You can count along at home or supply your own list in the comments below. Again, I'll leave a link to SGS Arts video down below. So for the number, I'm also going to go with Rush 2112. This has one of the best 20-minute songs of all time, and it's that magic alchemy of a 20-minute song that feels like about 6, because there's nothing worse than a long song that feels like a long song. The great thing about 2112 was this was a kind of crossroads album. The record label was probably going to drop them if this wasn't a success, so instead of perhaps going a little bit more commercial, they decided to go, what the hell, let's have side one and just have one song for 20 minutes, and it paid off. Obviously you can see by the outfits on the back, these are not meant to be trifled with. So we have the side one, the overture 2112, it's in 7 parts, because this is progressive rock, obviously. And yes, side 2 isn't as good as side 1, but there's still some wonderful songs on here. A Passage to Bangkok, The Twilight Zone, good fun stuff. And again, that 20-minute classic track is fairly impressive. I could listen to that all day and never get tired of it. So the first 5 letters of the alphabet especially were absolutely brutal, and again I've only one artist can appear on the list once. You can only use an artist once, basically. That's a long-winded way of saying that. So for the letter A, tough competition, but it has to be Injustice for All by Metallica. This is arguably my favourite album of all time, and certainly my favourite Metallica album. Again, much has been made of the lack of Jason Newsted's bass, because James and Lars pretty much turned it down during post-production. But in some way, because this is the first album after the death of their bass player Cliff Burton, in some ways it's kind of fitting that there's little to no bass on the album, so it just becomes a guitar and drums album, which makes it, for me, all the bleaker, all the darker, all the more punishing. This was the last album before they changed their sound and made shorter songs. One of the aspects was they were tired of playing longer songs live. This was the tour that I saw them on, which was arguably the greatest night of my life. This is the Metallica I know and love and remember. It's the best set of lyrics by Hetfield. Um, Bleak and dark and absolutely fantastic. Even though there was pretty stiff competition for the letter A, as there was for the letter B. But I'm going with Blues Funeral by Mark Lanegan. Band, obviously did a lot of solo stuff himself. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He was another long list of victims of the Seattle scene. If you read his autobiography, it's absolutely brutal. And he obviously had survivor guilt because he did provide drugs for a lot of the people who died in the Seattle scene. And if you read the autobiography and then listen to this, it's even more darker. Gravedigger song, go check that out on YouTube. It's absolutely fantastic. Harbourview Hospital, again, if you read his autobiography, that's where he almost lost an arm after doing some bad heroin. It's mostly about death, disease and addiction, and it's also quite wonderful. But again, letter B was difficult as well. Letter C was difficult, but I've went with Puscifer, Conditions of My Parole. Puscifer started off as Maynard James Keenan, the singer from Tool's kind of joke side project. They did do a song, Country Boner, about all the male and female country singers that he had sex with. But even although there's still a lot of humour in this album, as you can see by the artwork, this is where Puscifer, he can't help but be a serious musician, and with the addition of Karina Round's vocals along with his vocals, some of these songs are absolutely fantastic. Every song is quite wonderful, different styles. It's just absolutely wonderful. The other two, or the two Puscifer albums after this, are still very good, but they haven't had the perfection of Conditions of My Parole, which is absolutely wonderful. The letter D, again, difficult, but for me, it's an album that is 30 years old, which is hard to believe, but it's Alice in Chains' Dirt. Again, after the lead singer, Layne Staley, died, and you go back and listen to Alice in Chains' output, so many songs about death, addiction, depression, isolation, loneliness, and this is absolutely fantastic. He even had a couple of quote-unquote hit singles. For E, I'm going with Everything That Happens Will Happen Today, David Byrne and Brian Eno. David Byrne's one of the last musical geniuses from the 80s. He consistently produces wonderful albums, and this one is just about perfect. Track after track is absolutely wonderful. Again, more of his stream of consciousness lyrics, his true odd poetical sense, and again different musical styles that feature in all of his solo work, and Talking Heads for that matter. But this one is pretty special. F, again, this was difficult. I'm going to go with the Crusaders and Free as the Wind. This is a mainly instrumental album from 1977, but just the musicianship on it is just stunningly good. From Joe Sample to Larry Carlton on guitar, who did a lot of work with Steely Dan. He's on the Royal Scam classic Steely Dan album. But these 8 tracks are just absolutely perfect. The highlight Sweet and Sour, which is 8 minutes and 55, which has like a piano solo, guitar solo, sax solo. It's just a wonderful album. You can also check out Chain Reaction, which the album cover has a picture of a chain, and Those Southern Nights, which has the Crusaders dressed up as knights, which is a wonderful album cover in itself. But Freeze the Wind is my favourite of their albums. The Letter G is another important album in my life. It's King's X and Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, from the progressive rock kind of power trio from Texas that really ought to have been bigger in their career, but they always kind of fit between two stools. They were generally too melodic with Beatlesque harmonies for kind of hardcore metalers, and they were too heavy, too groove based for kind of easy listeners. So throughout their career they've always kind of been appreciated and respected by other musicians. If you read the excellent book on them, it's kind of wonderful to kind of see how much they were respected by everybody else, including those in the grunge scene, but then never had really any commercial success. They've recently released a new album, their first in 15 years. 3 great guys. I was lucky enough to see them and actually meet Doug Pinnick, the singer. All 3 of them, Ty Tabor and Jerry Gaskill, have multiple side projects that are all well worth checking out if you go down that rabbit hole. But Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, as soon as I heard the track Pleiades on Saturday Night Rock Show with Alan Fluff Freeman, way back in about 1990, I instantly fell in love with their sound, and they've been an important part of my listening habits for the last 30 years as well. So that's King's X, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, because apparently they were looking for an album title, and Ty, the guitarist, just came up with the most ridiculous sounding title, and that's the one they went for. H is Hats by the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile are a miserable Scottish band. Paul Buchanan's the lead vocalist, and his solo album Midair, spoiler alert, almost made the letter M, because that's just absolutely wonderful. Their songs are deceptively simple but wonderfully miserable, and it really evokes rainy nights in Glasgow extremely well. This is from 1989 or something like that. Again, another album I've had for over 30 years. That'll be a common theme. I is I'm Your Man with Leonard Cohen. I mean, what's more cooler than Leonard Cohen in a suit eating a banana? We'll stick that in the front cover. Again, I could have almost had Leonard Cohen for every letter of the alphabet, but again, rules is rules, so he just gets the letter I. First we take Manhattan, Ain't No Cure for Love, everybody knows, I'm Your Man, Take This Waltz, Jazz Police, I Can't Forget, and Tower of Song. Again, Leonard Cohen was a true poet and a genius. One of those guys that people always slagged off his voice, but then when you hear cover albums of his work, they just don't work. He used to write 100 verses per song and whittle them down because he was just a big show off. So I'm Your Man, again, this is the 80s, so slightly different production, slightly different instrumentation than some of his sparer early work, which is basically just an acoustic guitar. I'm Your Man's one of his many great albums. For J, I don't have a physical copy because a lot of my CDs are packed. But I'm going to go with Just As I Am by Bill Withers, who's absolutely wonderful. This has the classic Ain't No Sunshine, but also has my favourite Bill Withers song, Better Off Dead, which is about an alcoholic who has sold off all of his and his wife's possessions. Their telephone's been cut off. His wife goes to the local priest for help. It's a wonderful song, and it finishes with a gunshot. So if you're you have this view of Bill Withers as this kind of happy-go-lucky, a lot of his songs had a kind of darker side, or the non-hits had a darker side, and there's none darker than Better Off Dead. A wonderful little song. And for the letter K, we have Ki Oku. This is by DJ Crush, who is a French DJ, strangely enough, and Toshinoniro Kondo, who is a Japanese trumpet player. It sounds like it wouldn't work at all, but it actually does. It's all instrumental, obviously with trumpet and beats. Again, shouldn't work, but it's absolutely wonderful chill out music, even though there is a kind of discordant, kind of uncomfortable edge to it as well. For L, going with Lateralis by Tool. This again is probably going to be, if I ever did a top 10 albums, it would probably be in it. Just an amazing journey, so well produced, best listened to with earphones. And again, all members of the band just on top form, as pretty much they always are. Maynard on vocals, Justin Chancellor on bass, Adam Jones on guitar, and obviously the octopus, Danny Carey, on drums, who is just absolutely amazing. Yeah, from 2001, just an absolutely stunning album that takes you on a journey every time you listen to it. So for M, I had to get St. Vincent in here somewhere. So this is Mass Seduction. But again, Daddy's Home could have been for D. Marry Me could have been on M. She hasn't made a bad album. She's always evolving. She does have a fantastic guitar sound. She's got a signature guitar, if you want to Google that. Yeah, she's right up there with my favourite artists of the 21st century. She's always, as I say, she's always evolving, changing her style, but still with that fundamental St. Vincent. She also did an album with David Byrne, which you should check out. There's a video for one of the songs that's absolutely hilarious with David Byrne and St. Vincent. Yeah, Daddy's Home is her 70s inspired album that might be still my favourite album of this year. But Mass Seduction and the remix album Mass Education, a remix album that's actually worth picking up because a lot of them generally aren't. But Mass Seduction is a fantastic entry point if you're wanting to get into St. Vincent. N is New Direction by Grand Tone Music, who are a Swedish band fronted by Nina Ramsby, who has now transitioned to male, but he originally was in Salt, and they have 2 albums, kind of indie garage rock with jagged guitars, but wonderful voice. And then also did Baxter, which is a side project, and 3 Grand Tone Music albums, which are just all just about perfect. The self-titled, This New Direction, and then one called Go to Hell, and they are all absolutely fantastic. Bit guitar, a bit keyboards, kind of mellow, but just fantastic all round. And then where are we? We're at the letter O. Again, another album I've had for over 30 years, Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. Arguably the greatest concept album ever made. It's absolutely wonderful in the way it's constructed. You can actually just put it on repeat and the whole thing forms a loop. Political conspiracies, assassinations of politicians and members of the clergy, brainwashing. It was made in 1988. The subject matter is still relevant because we're still dealing with the same issues. This is the lovely deluxe edition that came out. It's just an album, again, it's one of those albums I could just listen to all day long. Tells a wonderful story, but there's really great craftsmanship in the music. The production's absolutely fantastic. And Queensryche would never be as good ever again. P, Power Slave by Iron Maiden. Obviously Iron Maiden had to get in here as well. Again, there could have been quite a lot of choices. I went with Power Slave, Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Flash of the Blade, The Duelist, Back in the Village, and We're Back in the Village, and We're Back in the Village again. And obviously the title track and Rime of the Ancient Mariner, very much like 2112. Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a 13.5-minute song that feels like 4 minutes. And that's a really hard thing to do. I never got this in vinyl, but I really should have at the time, because the artwork, Derek Riggs, is absolutely fantastic as always. It's one of the best Derek Riggs covers. So that's Power Slave. Q. There's only really going to be one or two choices for Q, not a very large list of letters. But it's Queen and Queen 2. Also, I could have went for Queen and Queen, but I went for Queen 2 because it probably is my favourite Queen album. Yes, there's still kind of a little bit of Led Zeppelin stuff on here, but you're getting stuff like March of the Black Queen, which is a kind of forward-looking piece to what Bohemian Rhapsody would perhaps come, even though I prefer March of the Black Queen. It opens with Procession, it finishes with Seven Seas of Rye. But you've got Father to Son, White Queen, Someday One Day, Losing the End, Ogre Battle, Fairy Fells, Masterstroke. So you've still got a little bit of Tolkien-y, Led Zeppelin-y stuff. But it's got some wonderful kind of those aspects of Queen that would perhaps be more polished and more honed as their career would progress with Day at the Races and Night at the Opera. But this is just a step up from more of the straight-ahead rock of their debut, which is still probably their heaviest album. But Queen 2, we started seeing the changes in production, the more layered production, and it's certainly a sign of things to come, but it's absolutely amazing. The letter R, no surprise to anybody, Rain and Blood. If you're of a certain sensibility, there's kind of two times in your life before you hear Rain and Blood and after you hear Rain and Blood. And it's still brutal and aggressive and wonderful to this day. Coming up for 40 years old, and it's still absolutely wonderful. Great titles: Angel of Death, Piece by Piece, which is about a cannibalistic feast. Necrophobic, Altar of Sacrifice, Jesus Saves, Criminally Insane, Reborn, Epidemic, which has a ridiculous groove. It's almost a boogie song. Postmortem, and Rain and Blood to finish up. Under half an hour, but still absolutely essential and never gets old. So for S, I could have picked another two Slayer albums, but I didn't. I'm going to go with Skeleton Tree by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Halfway through this, Nick Cave's son died. So some things were added and some things were changed. But this is spare, minimalist. This is a kind of change in sound. It's more atmospheric background music rather than succinct instrumental. And obviously you would take this to perhaps the extreme with the following album, Ghost Teen, which was a double album, which had again more ambience and less instrumentation. But this is wonderful whether you take into account his son's death or not. Obviously the cover tells you all you need to know. It's very spare, not a lot of things going on, doesn't have lyrics in the inside or anything. And the last two songs, Distant Sky and Skeleton Tree, are absolutely emotionally devastating. He does have a guest, a Swedish soprano on Distant Sky, who's absolutely fantastic. I did get an album of her recordings, which is wonderful as well. Very sombre, depressing, but somehow uplifting as well. So that's Skeleton Tree. Predictably there's some Bob Dylan here. Time Out of Mind. This might be a common theme, but this is, I think, his most depressing. This is from 1997. This is easily one of his best, if not his best, albums in the last 30 years, 35 years. Lovesick, Stand in the Doorway, Million Miles, Not Dark Yet, Trying to Get to Heaven, in brackets before they close the door. Not Dark Yet, in brackets, but it's getting there. Cold Irons Bound, and then the 11-minute closer, Highlands. Just a wonderful ambience of loss, depression, melancholy, regret. There's not a chink of light anywhere to be seen. This is dark and brooding, and it's also wonderful. What a coincidence. I don't have the copy to my hand because again it's probably packed, but I've went with Uncle Jam Wants You by Funkadelic, which has I've used this as the thumbnail for the video, but it has Knee Deep, Holly wants to go to Hollywood, no, but it's wonderful. Again, I could have picked several Funkadelic albums, but Uncle Jam Wants You is absolutely fantastic and has an iconic cover. George Clinton should definitely run for president. So V, I went for Vitalogy or Vitalogy by Pearl Jam. This was the album they did after Kurt Cobain's death, and it's probably their darkest album, but it's still fantastic. I don't know why this seems to be a common theme, but all these albums seem to be a bit dark. Last Exit, Spin the Black Circle, Not For You, Tremor Christ, Nothing Man and Better Man, Corduroy is fantastic, Immortality, wonderful stuff. I think it absolutely bombed because people wanted more of 10, but as we know, Pearl Jam kind of shied away from the limelight and got more and more experimental and less popular, but Vitalogy is still wonderful. So for W, Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. This, along with Animals, is probably my favourite Pink Floyd album. I do think Dark Side of the Moon is a little bit overrated. Actually, I'm a weirdo and I actually prefer the Final Cut to Dark Side of the Moon, and the Final Cut was more Roger Waters' solo album, an actual Pink Floyd album. This only has 5 tracks, and 2 of them are Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is a tribute to Syd Barrett. But Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and the title track are all absolutely fantastic. Again, a very spare production, very sombre, melancholy album. It does have one of the most iconic album covers in music history as well. So that's W. For X, again, I don't have the disc to hand, but I'm going with XXI Century Blood by The Warning, who are a Mexican all-female power trio who started making records or started making music when they were like 14 and 15. I think they're maybe the grand old age of about 20 now. I think they have about 2 albums and an EP. They have started like touring America and getting a bit more exposure. But I'm going to go with 21st Century Blood, or XXI, to get round the whole X. But you should go check out The Warning. There's plenty of YouTube videos of them when they were younger and older. So why? I'm going to go with You Will Never Be One of Us by Nails. This is probably about as extreme as I get as far as my metal tastes. It took a while. The first time I saw the video for the title track, I was like, oh my goodness, that's quite brutal. It was only like months afterwards I went back and watched it again, and then by the 3rd time I watched it, I kind of clicked. This is their 3rd album, I believe. This is their longest. I think it clocks in at like 22 minutes, and the last track's 8 minutes, so the rest of it's like 14 minutes long. Because their kind of philosophy is we want to take the best moments from metal songs and just condense it down. So a lot of riffing, a lot of growly shouting, but it does kind of make sense. The title track's fantastic. Life is a Death Sentence is fantastic. In the end, They Come Crawling Back, the 8-minute one, actually has some brutal, big, groovy doom riffs. Violence is Forever, Savage Intolerance, In Pain. Your ears may be in pain after listening to it, but if you listen to it enough times, all their albums do kind of click and grow on you. Maybe it's just me. So that's Nails, You Will Never Be One of Us. And then Z, well, the artist begins with Z, so the album might as well start with Z. And it's Zappa, Zoot Allures. Not my favourite Zappa. My favourite's Overnight Sensation, because I'm one of those strange Zappa fans who actually like Zappa when he's a bit more contained. And Apostrophe's probably my 2nd favourite, but this is probably my 3rd favourite. It has The Torture Never Stops, Disco Boy, Wonderful Wino, Wind Up Working in a Gas Station, Black Napkins. It's got a few instrumental tracks which are fantastic. Virtuosic playing, as you'd expect. And it has that Frank Zappa sense of humour as well. So Zoot Allures by Zappa finishes the A to Z of albums. Not a pleasant challenge, because there's so many great albums that I had to leave out, which is actually quite painful. But who knows, I'll maybe do this again at some point, or do an extended version, I don't know. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know your A to Z of albums, and again, I'll leave the link to SJS Art's original video. Go subscribe to his channel and leave comments there as well, and hopefully you'll join me again for more videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.